Okay. Sorry for that because the switch off my phone. Sorry, it is my birthday today, and the phone keeps ringing. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. Today you will take part in a different type of webinar. Our chair, Mr. John Stewart, whom you all know by now, also from his actions and fight because he spent 20 years as the chair of HACAN, the community campaign which gives a voice to residents under the Heathrow flight paths, will give a short presentation, and then he will lead the discussion where you can talk about examples of good and bad practices at your airports if you wish. Dear John, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Bathira. And before I share just a few slides, because largely it's a discussion today, this topic has come up almost by popular demand. People contact UECNA saying at their airport something is not done very well, and do we know of other airports where the operational practice is better? And occasionally we get people saying, actually, at our airport, things work, but not at some of the other airports. So what we thought we would do is I'll do a small introduction, and then we can have a discussion as to what does good operational practice look like? How can it really, because the best practices can reduce noise for residents and can reduce noise quite significantly, and they're worth having. So with that short introduction, I'll go into my slides. Okay, we're there. So that's just the title of the webinar. And I'm going to go through one or two examples of best operational practice. I'm sure you may have others when it comes to the discussion. And the first one is continuous descent approach. Aircraft, as many of you know, can descend in one of two ways, either in a step-by-step fashion or using continuous descent approach. And a continuous descent approach can cut noise by between 2.5 and 5 decibels. Now, 2.5 decibels is not really perceptible to the human ear, but 5 decibels is, and it's worth happening. And when we looked at what airports use continuous descent approach across Europe, there is considerable variation. I think Norway is the best at using it, and Charles de Gaulle, surprisingly, comes very close to the bottom of the list. But continuous descent approach can cut noise, is worth having, and as I'll say throughout my presentation, if one airport can do it, why can't all the airports do it? Right, I'm just pausing for a second in order to let some more people in. If you don't mind, just keep looking at that slide, and I'll admit a couple more people. Okay, so that's the first example I've used. Hello, we've just started. That's the first example of a practice that is good practice and can cut noise. I will now go on to a second example. I'm sorry there's a lot of words on this, but it's the angle of descent and ascent. Now, as most of you again will know, international rules require aircraft to land at a 3-degree angle. But some airports, such as London City, with smaller planes and tall buildings to avoid, are permitted to land more steeply. At the moment, on their final approach to London City, planes land at 5.5 degrees, which means they are higher longer. Heathrow and Frankfurt a few years ago trialed a 3.2 degrees approach. They found it was operationally possible, but it only had a small impact on noise levels, just up to 0.5 decibel reduction. And that's not really perceptible to the human ear. But what could make more of a difference is what is known as a two-segment approach. This involves planes using a steeper angle, perhaps even 5 degrees, further away from the airport, before reverting to 3 or 3.2 degrees for the last few kilometers when they've got to be lined up with the runway. 5 degrees would make a difference. And I know there's campaigners at a number of airports are urging their airport to experiment with this two-segment approach. Departing planes, and this is fairly obvious, can take off more or less steeply. There are advantages to both. If planes take off very steeply, there is more noise for those living very close to the airport, but less noise for those further away. If they're less steep, there is it works the other way around. And I know there are people on the call today who will probably want to give examples of this because it's a very live discussion at a number of airports. So let me move on to my third example. And I think this is quite an important example, lowering the landing gear. Now, I think when I was at school, I never heard the word landing gear. We weren't taught about landing gear. But essentially, it's when aircraft coming into land lower their wheels. And for modern aircraft, landing gear is the dominant noise source on approach. When landing gear has been lowered, noise levels increase by between 3 and 5 decibels. So the later the landing gear is lowered, the less people affected by noise. What the aviation industry tell me is that in order to get a stabilized approach, landing gear needs to go down at an altitude of between 1 and 2,000 feet. That's essentially about 2 to 3 minutes before touchdown. But at some airports, some airlines are lowering their landing gear much before that and increasing the noise. There are other measures which can reduce the noise for residents. Alternating the flight paths to provide respite is an example. Is a fairly obvious example. This happens in West London at Heathrow. For those people living in West London closest to the airport, flights switch flight paths at 3 o'clock in the afternoon so that you only get a half day. So you only get a half day with the planes and a half day's break from the noise. And I certainly know people who live in West London greatly value that. Again, if it can be done at an airport like Heathrow, with 2 runways. It certainly can be done at airports with more runways. Some airports, and indeed a increasing number of airports, have restrictions on night flights. Some have no night flights at all, like Dusseldorf or Munich. Others have restrictions. There are restrictions at Heathrow, at Frankfurt, but other airports have night flights all through the night. And we know from past webinars when people have talked about aviation noise and health, that night flights are a major contributor to poor health. Many airports have fines for offending aircraft. And I think this is quite important because you can have all the rules and regulations in the world, but if aircraft are not obeying those rules and regulations and there's no punishment for them, they have no incentive to obey them. Fines do seem to work. I think it's also many airports these days would recognize that for the people worst affected, it is only fair that they pay for the insulation of homes. And I think many airports across Europe do this, but not all. Again, if some can do it, why can't they all? So this is my last slide, really just to sum up the measures that could be taken to reduce noise for residents at airports. Continuous descent approach, the angle of descent and ascent, when planes lower their landing gear, alternating the flight paths to provide respite, maybe for half a day, maybe for a third of the day, some sort of restrictions on night flights, fines for offending aircraft, and the airport paying for insulation for people who are close to the airport. Now, I think if all these things were done, there would be a considerable benefit for residents. Individually, the benefit may be fairly small. The benefit of individual measures may be fairly small, but put them all together and we have a significant benefit. Now, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to stop sharing my slides. Because essentially today is really a discussion, and it's a discussion for all of us to get involved in talking about our own airports. What I did was really just a few examples to prompt discussion, but you will have examples at your own airports, and you will also have examples you may want to share, whether they're good examples or bad examples, because my theme today is if one airport can operate well,
Oh, c'est rien, j'écoute
why can't they
un
all?
webinaire, enfin, oui,
Jean-Claude, I'm afraid we can hear you.
discussion des riverains
Jean-Claude, I'm afraid we
européens
can hear you talking.
espionne. J'écoute ce qu'ils disent sur le groupe. Aucun son, ils m'entendent.
Jean-Claude, thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so it's open discussion, and if you want to put on your cameras, that's absolutely fine because we can then see each other. If you're busy having a meal and you don't want to put on your camera, that's equally fine. And again, I repeat, for me, a webinar in English is easy because English is my native tongue. In fact, to be perfectly honest, English is the only language I can speak. But please don't hesitate if you find English a little bit difficult, because you are amongst friends and we will help you out. So, following on from my short presentation, who would like to tell us something about good practice, bad practice at their airport, or simply to discuss various things, some of the aspects. Bertold, your hand is up, so welcome.
That's one example of bad practice, an issue you have not told about, intersection starts. When the planes begins their start not at the beginning of the runway, but in the middle, and they reach a lower altitude, and so they are noisier. In this gives also an additional problem. Who knows the dependency between thrust and noise?
I'll take your first point first because it's a much easier point to answer. You're absolutely right. Where planes take off on a runway is hugely important and hugely important for the residents, particularly those nearby. And it's something that the best airports do well, others don't. I'm not enough of a technical expert, Berto, to know the relationship between thrust and noise. But there may be other people on the call who are. If not, we will. I can come back to you offline on that.
Yes, I know. Since a couple of weeks, I know the dependency, and it is very interesting.
Oh, okay. Go and say something about it because it will be interesting to people. Yes.
If you increase the thrust by only 4%, you get a noise emission increase of 1 dB. Or if you increase the thrust by 20%, you get a noise increase of 5 dB. You have an enormous dependency between thrust and noise emission. And I was surprised as I see this. You can see this dependency in the NPD dates of the ECAC Doc 29 or in the tables of the German BUFF. And if the increase in thrust has such a large effect on noise, it is important to reduce the thrust if possible. But it is not meaningful at the airport itself, because at the airport itself, it doesn't matter the noise.
Yes.
It is interesting in most cases during the departure. And it is also important at approach. We have perfidious approach system in Frankfurt with long horizontal flight legs at approach, 40 kilometers in 4,000 feet.
Well, that's very low.
And in this situation, the planes flight with thrust setting, and they are loud. And this is generally a problem of all, or typically a problem of airports with independent landing operation on 2 runways. Then you need the lower and the higher side. And on the lower side, you have typically long intermediate approach, typically at 4,000 feet, 20 kilometers and more. And this is the problem of large airports, and you in London will get this problem if London will construct the third runway. Will build the third runway.
Listen, this is very interesting, Bertold. I had no idea that on takeoff there was such a dramatic relationship between thrust and noise. And you are right that some airports, I think Paris is the same, that they have long and fairly low approaches, and I can't see the need for that. Darlene, welcome. Your hands up.
I was going to make my first comment is just to give some perspective in the US, which is we tried to do the alternating flight paths, and the feedback, there's a safety issue. And the interesting question is, what attributes are there at Heathrow that allows them to do that versus, say, another location? Because as you know, all airspaces are different. So that's kind of an interesting thing to look at. We are not allowed in the United States as of 1990. There was a legislation called ANCA, A-N-C-A. We're not allowed to restrict the number of operations. We're not allowed to do curfews. So the only airports in the United States that have that were grandfathered before 1990. So that
Really?
adds to the confusion because you're like,
Yeah,
oh,
absolutely.
this airport or that port, and including a GA airport. In fact, there's some GA airports. So those are
Yes.
all grandfathered. So by law, you cannot restrict the number of operations or the time that a plane flies. So just to kind of put that in perspective. And some of those airports are allowed to do fines, but again, they are pre the ANCA law. And the airport pays for insulation is complex because it's all about budgeting and how much grants they get. It's not straight off that everybody that qualifies gets the funding. So that's a strong variation in the United States. So I just wanted to share that perspective because your countries, like I understand, Switzerland has a countrywide curfew. So that is a country decision.
No, that's really interesting. On the question of alternation and safety, again, I don't want to be too definite because, but I think as long as the runways are far enough apart, then you can alternate because there shouldn't really be a problem because what if they're alternating one plane, it depends how they do the alternation, Darlene. At Heathrow, they use one runway, say the northern runway, until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and there are no planes landing on the southern runway, and so there's no, and then they switch. So if you do alternation like that, there's not really a safety problem. If they did alternation so that they had, say, every second plane landed on the northern runway, and you also had landings at the same time on the southern runway, then potentially there is a safety problem. But but I think it needs to be, completely time-based, so that for half the day, for example, you get no landings on one runway and landings are permitted on the other runway.
I think what they looked at was like these days it's this runway and these days it's that runway versus I don't think they could do the time base because of the wind, etc.
Right. I mean, the wind does. I should have said one of the qualifications is wind does play a role because you obviously have to land into the wind. But it is possible. This alternation is possible, and even a big runways, even a big airports like Heathrow, I, maybe you and I have connect offline,
Yes.
maybe through email or something,
Yeah,
and
because I think we should, it's a great comment that you made. I think we need to check in on the variables so that we can, ask the right questions.
no, I think that's exactly right because there are I think Wouter is here from from just wait a minute till I admit somebody who's just coming in. Is anybody here from Schiphol? I saw Wouter come in, but he's maybe gone away again because Schiphol and Charles de Gaulle have many more runways than Heathrow, and I think there's a form of alternation takes place at those runways as well. But I would need to check. But Darlene, let's, as I say, let's link up offline, and we can, at least, as you say, you know what the right questions are to ask, because I'm convinced it's possible at most of the American airports. The exception may be if there are two airports, if the flight paths of two airports are very close to each other, that it may be more difficult.
So someone made a comment, which I think is a very valid comment, is they are trying to put in as much capacity as possible. So alternating runways shuts off their capacity.
Absolutely right. No, and that's why I think that's why airports these days are more reluctant to do it, because the alternation came in at Heathrow in the 1970s when there was plenty of capacity, and and once they put it in, as people from Heathrow who are on the call will know, it would be hugely unpopular to take it out. But these days, capacity is a much bigger concern. Absolutely right. Yes, I think Andrea, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, John, thank you so much.
A real hand, I'm glad to say.
Yeah, yes. It was so nice to see you in Vienna and now as well. So thank you so much for organize this webinar on this very, very interesting and very, very urgent topic. So I couldn't wave automatically, so this is why I do it manually. I'm just thinking aloud as a lawyer. So when I read firstly the title of this webinar, I try to look back in my practice in terms of knowledge from the legal side, and I started to think about how it is possible already just in Europe. The Single European Sky regulatory package was launched more than 20 years ago.
Yes.
And this package is for priorities were environment, efficiency, cost effectiveness, and safety. Already 21 years old. And so far, it is problem to each European airport. Meanwhile, Single European Sky put into its flag to reduce noise, especially with the collaborative decision making all together with the airports, with the airlines, and with the ATM industry, and also the continuous descent. It is one of the biggest issue of the environment and also cost effectiveness side of this initiative. So it's a terrible that, especially now when we are suffering more and more from noise, and there is more and more damage to people, children, everybody around airports, we are still in this step. And yes, as a lawyer again, going back to ICAO. So in its standards, it has already been so-called settled down the balanced approach. Why it is not possible to solve it? I was so happy when I read just 1 month ago when the Athens Declaration was signed at the ACI Europe's annual meeting. They try to focus on the noise issue as well, together with A4Europe, together with the European Regional Airline Association and ACI. So I hope this can be a good initiation again for the future. But we are still in a very, very beginning, and we try to discuss it. We try to do our best. We could follow a lot of very interesting presentations under UECNA, but still we are traveling, and we are more and more traveling. And whenever I used to accommodated not far from airports, I used to experience the problem each part of Europe.
Yeah.
So this is what I felt is a little bit important to share with you. So
Andrea,
thank you so much.
No, Andrea, thank you very much for all of that, and a number of points there. But I think you made a very interesting point about if we're going to have best practice, everyone's got to buy into it. The airlines, the airport, the air traffic control, and it's not easy sometimes to get them all together, but I think, but it's an excellent point. And in some airports, it shows it can be done. You know, Oslo, for example, has a continuous descent approach. I think virtually 100%. It may not quite be 100%. And now all parties must have bought into that. Possibly prompted by the Norwegian government. So, but it's a good point. It's not easy, and it requires a lot of negotiation for it to happen. It's a really good point. There's been quite a lot of discussion on the chat, as far as I can see, about PBN, performance-based navigation routes, and these are the ones that, as we all know, are coming in. The next webinar which will be done jointly by Nicole Porter and Paul Hooper in September will focus on some of this, but PBN routes, they are controversial, but they are definitely what's coming in. My own view, but I know it's not shared by everybody, but my own view is they do give the opportunity to bring in respite and alternation. We've heard from in America, in New York in particular, from Elaine Miller. We got two very good presentations about how the way they use PBN is simply to have all the planes over the same communities all the time. Non-stop noise, and you know, they're narrow flight paths, they're concentrated flight paths, and my view is if they're narrow concentrated flight paths, there's more opportunity than there is at the present of alternating those flight paths and allowing some break from the noise. But as I say, Nicole Porter and Paul Hooper will be talking about this at our next webinar in some detail, which is on the 17th of September. In fact, what is interesting about their presentation is that they asked residents around one of the UK airports what they would like to see from the introduction of the new PBN flight paths, how they would like to see what the fairest possible way of operating would be. And so very rarely are communities consulted in that way. So that'd be a very interesting presentation. But PBN is the way it is coming in, and it is, and we've got to avoid, I think with Darlene, we've got to avoid what's happened in America.
Yeah, I think the theme is equity. You know, should one community get all the problem? And so they need to create multiple PBN procedures so that there is rotation in the procedure. That's the issue, not rotating the landing, because there, you know, in California, San Francisco, there's only 2 runways. I mean, there's not a lot of rotation options. So I think that if I had to say one thing, it would be the equity of the dispersion of the PBN, which means you need multiple PBNs.
Yeah.
You know, and I would be, you know, the positive part is, can there be more dispersion? I think that has to be a condition versus an assumption. PBN will give us more rotation. It's got to be built into the design, right?
That's absolutely my view, and I think equity is the critical thing. And as somebody once said, it's difficult for people to argue against fairness. They may not like it, but it's difficult to argue publicly against fairness or against equity.
In the United States, once they put all the PBNs in, then you're not allowed to change anything because you're not allowed to move noise. So that's something that,
So it has to be equity from the start.
yeah.
My personal view is that that's absolutely right, but others may have different views, in which case we're happy to hear them. But Bertolt, you've got your hand up again. You're on mute, Bertolt.
Yes, I have seen it. To BBN, in Germany, the German ATC is changing its procedures to BBN. It must be done, and they try to construct the same parts than the old procedures, so that we have no large change by the introduction of BBN. The problem with BBN is that normally the radii must be larger, and so if you generate this larger radii, you move the noise, and this is often not that what we will. And in Germany, they make the exception. They make the buff, the raw for the ATC made exceptions, gives exceptions from the ICAO rules, and so it is possible to realize the same flight paths than with old procedures. Generally,
Sorry, Bertolt, I interrupted. On you go. Yes. On you go.
generally, the concentration is given by PBN, but if the ideal path is in the middle between housing areas, then it is better to concentrate than if there is not concentrate. And that is different. There is any situation is different.
Yes, I agree with that. Each airport can be different. But you wanted to come back, Darlene.
Yeah, I just wanted to show a quick visual a second just to make it
Yes,
clear.
far away. Yeah,
Can you see that?
we can indeed. Yes.
This is an example of Boston before PBN in 2010 and after PBN in 2015. And what's misleading is that the flight tracks didn't change, because the way flight tracks are today, there is a lot of dispersion. So when the pilots coming in, there's natural dispersion. But with PBN, you don't have the dispersion because it allows you to fly very precisely.
Yeah.
So just because the flight tracks don't change doesn't mean it's going to be the same noise. And, there's all kinds of data in this report that shows you the level of complaints before and after and the level of noise. So really what you're looking at is what, on the analysis that's being done, is you want to know what the number of events at what noise levels are over the different neighborhoods. You're not free in the clear by saying it's the same procedure. It's really what it all comes down to is the lived experience of people on the ground. And that's through the number of events at different sound levels and how that changes before and after. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. And it ties in with what's happened at London City Airport, which I think is the only UK airport to currently operate PBN routes. They introduced the PBN routes in 2016, and within a year, complaints went up fivefold because people who really, London City, as many of you will know, has fairly small aircraft, and prior to PBN, it wasn't really a problem for most people. But suddenly, people got concentration all day long, and the same communities are overflowed. In fact, one campaigner said to me, "John, I understand fully what you're saying, because the planes effectively go up my street." it's as narrow and concentrated as that. So what you're saying, Darlene, is it's backed up big time by the experience at London City Airport. So I'm conscious we've talked about PBN routes, and I think that's right, because I think that is what's coming in. And as I say, we're doing a full webinar on them next time round. But any other examples of good practice or bad practice that I may have missed out, because when I did my introduction, it wasn't intended to be comprehensive. It was just to spark off some discussion. Yes, Amel.
Right. Yeah, thank you. Well, there is one thing that's happening at Heathrow, which, I mean, with the new chief executive from Copenhagen, who is actually saying that aircraft are now much quieter, and that the noise contour has not come down. But what is very concerning, and I mean, we have it in our own village, so I'm talking from experience. We had four 3-bedroom houses. Each of them was owned by an elderly person. They have all passed away because of Heathrow Airport, the third runway, really, for the last 20 odd years. Investment companies are now buying, so they are not interested really. They buy at a very low price. They are not living there, so they really don't care about the noise. And they all turn them into what we called HMOs, which is houses of multiple occupation. So those four houses, where there were 4 people, have got now 24 people. So what we need to remember, which I keep telling all the people on all the group I'm to, is the noise contour may be smaller, but the number of people impacted is actually getting larger, because we are so close to Heathrow, and there are all those houses which are now used, for it's one person with a door, and then they can share the loo and the toilets and the kitchen. So it's actually, we must stop Heathrow saying the contour is smaller. They are right, but the impact is much bigger, and that is not mentioned.
I want to say it's very misleading to say the contour is the same, because the 65 DNL contour, what we have in the United States, if you increase DNL, not DB, but DNL by 3, that's a doubling of the number of flights. So the problem is that DNL is not that sensitive to the count of events. So they're using a metric, which is DNL, that's insensitive or less sensitive to the number of events. So they can truthfully say the contour is the same. All of the 65 DNL contour hasn't changed with the advent of next gen in the United States. That doesn't mean we're not experiencing this problem, as you mentioned, that Elaine Miller talked about. So one of the difficulties is that the DNL metric is the wrong metric to determine what the delta in noise is with PBN. It's the count of events. That's the issue. That's what's annoying you, is how many airplanes come over you at different noise levels. So the contour is a construct that is not representative of the lived experience, and that's part of the advocacy that gets promoted.
No, you're absolutely right. I certainly know at some airports in the UK and in some in Europe, they're beginning to use complementary metrics. So, for example, the N60, which shows the number of flights above 60 decibels or more, which have gone overhead, and it may not be perfect, but I think it represents what people feel much more, because these days it's the number of planes rather than the noise of each plane that is the problem. Bertolt, you've been waiting patiently, and then I'll come to Bob.
Yes, I will tell about approach, the interesting approach to reduce or to move flight path from residential areas in Berlin there was introduced a curve which begins before the end of the runway. It is not necessary at start to reach the end of the runway to curve. You can curve in the moment you reach 400 feet above ground. And this is often before the end, at long runways, that is often before the end of the runway. And in this case, it was possible to avoid the direct overflight of residential areas.
This is very interesting, and it relates to the earlier point you made about where planes take off on a particular runway and how that can actually lessen the noise significantly. And it's not something I mentioned, Berto, but it's a very good point. And again, if some airports can do it, why can't more airports do it? Bob, you wanted to come in next. Even better, we can see you now, Bob.
Okay, yeah. Hello there. I have studied in quite detail how these metrics work. And for instance, the LDN or DNL metric is a logarithmic function. And these log functions, they tend to make large numbers small. And in actual fact, if you look at the effect of increasing numbers, say if you go from 10,000 to 15,000 flights, that's quite a substantial increase in the level. If you go from 100,000 to 150,000, it's very much less so. So these metrics, they actually facilitate the growth in numbers, specifically when the dB values and the peak values are reduced, for instance, 2 or 3 dB, which could result indeed in a double amount of aircraft. Now we are facing aviation growth, which is expected to double by 2050. People should realize that that's the estimate. And I fear that all good practice is actually counteracted by this enormous growth. And in addition, I'm living in an area which is under threat by the coming PBN routes.
Are you around Schiphol, Bob?
Yeah, Schiphol, yeah.
Yeah.
About 90 kilometers away from Schiphol.
Okay.
Yeah. So
and you're faced with a PBN route.
I see subtle changes in the way they fly in, indicating that one of these routes might be right above our heads. So I'm not very happy at this moment.
No.
And I fear that for many people in our country, but also in other countries, there is a tremendous decrease in the living circumstances by these routes. And I don't see any proper action counteracting this threat.
Bob, thanks very much for that. At Schiphol, just before I come back to Darlene, at Schiphol, they're bringing in PBN? Are they bringing in a number of PBN routes? Do you know?
I've seen something they call a master class of airspace design. That's the way they try to formulate things. They call it master class. And what I've read in this document is that per runway, there will be, for the landing traffic, there will be 2 routes.
Right. So
that means that if you're not going to the situation for night flights, and you say the remaining 16 hours are being spread over 2 routes. That means 8 hours of noise per day for those people. And that's really
it's a lot. It's better than 16 hours a day, but it's still a lot. Yeah, my own view is it would be ideal if people were under a flight path, if they were only under the flight path for a third of the day rather than half the day. It may be more possible at some airports than others. Darlene, you wanted to come back in.
I wanted to fast forward you since we all had PBN Next Gen done in about 2015, 2018 in the United States. Is so what different groups did is they started forming roundtables, or there was existing roundtable, and they tried to fund fixing the problem with changing the procedures that were over them. The constraint, though, is one, the FAA said we're not going to allow changes to move noise. So after you already have it, you can't move it back, which is hard to do. And so they hired consultants. There are 3 projects that were involved that I'm aware of. One recently in BWI Airport. They just did a report out. It's all available. I can send you the links. But what they did is they tried to come up with procedures that took it back to affect, less people and so on. Well, the reality is there's only corner cases where it's going to help. So they promoted that they were going to reduce the altitudes. And so they presented the reduction of altitudes at a variety of points. And this is just one slide of a project they did at BWI. But don't be fooled by lowering this altitude, because just lowering this altitude does not mean your dB level is going to reduce very much. So this is trick number 1, or misleading number 1, is that these changes created these reductions in altitude. That you don't care about altitude that the noise doesn't reduce. And how planes fly noisy, as you just heard, contributes to the noise. So the other thing I wanted to show you, and this slide set's all available, is this unique area, they move the contour. So they move the procedure down. So you can see the contour moved from the blue to the purple. And so there were some winners and losers, and they were able to do this at BWI because the people who voted had a mixture of communities in their areas. Usually in the way it works is a city votes for or against, and if you're going to be negative, you would vote against it. But if you have a mix, you can do more equity, if you will. So this is a very unique case where there was approval by this body to make this change, even though some people are going to be worse off and some people are going to be better off. There's 2 other examples where they weren't able to make almost any changes because somebody was going to be worse off, which, as you all know, is probably likely. So the other thing to show, though, that's more telling is they did get a separate consultant to come up with the and above changes. So they were able to show this is over 90 days. So you might think, oh, good, green, 76 to 125 events. Well, over 90 days, that's 1 airplane a day. So the reduction is 1 airplane a day. So I just kind of want to show you the details, because it could be misleading if you don't look at the details of what the impacts of this were. And so there's, the communities that have done these changes, it hasn't been like, oh, good, we reset back to where we were. And there's only some corner case communities that benefited. So I'm showing you fast forward the remediation that we've attempted to do in the United States. And this costs serious money to hire the consultant. This isn't like a free offer. This is people getting money through their local governments or their transportation groups, etc. So I just wanted to share that with you.
That's really useful because, as we've been hearing, PBN is definitely coming into Europe. Bob, your hand is still up. I don't know if that's an old hand or a new hand.
I'd like to add another remark.
Yeah, sure.
It's more of a social type, because when you discuss PBN, there will be people who are favored and there will be people who are disfavored. And I think it will be relatively easy to play groups against one another. Is there any experience in other countries that indicate this?
Well, see if there's anyone's coming up. If not, I mean, what in the UK, PBN hasn't come in yet, except at London City Airport, but there's a lot of emphasis on the concept of equity and fairness that Darlene was talking about, and I think if you use the concept of fairness, that does mean that some areas may get more planes in order to ensure that some communities don't get all the planes all the time. But I don't know whether there's been developments in other countries or not. I suspect Bob, things are just beginning to move now. We've heard from Bertolt about the German experience, which is slightly different, in trying not to move planes unless they're over a very quiet area with no homes. And your point is right, Bertolt. It is airport by airport, because there's a big difference between sometimes airports in urban areas like San Francisco, New York, London, Frankfurt, Schiphol, and some of the airports in quieter areas. Amel, I think your hand. I think that's a new hand.
Yes, I think being fair and equitable is very right. The airport always talk about the benefit of an airport, but if there are benefits and there are disbenefits, then everybody should share them equally.
Yes.
And it isn't right that it's always the same people who've got quietness and also the same people who got noise. I mean, we have a problem really around the airport, is that whatever happened, the people around the airport, very close, surrounding the airport, have got noise 24/7, because it's not just about flying in and out. It's about all the noise which it made when they check their engines, there is a lot of noise created by an airport, even when nothing moves. And that is not really taken on board, not only by the airport, but also by actually our local community, who only realized in 2014, when they started PBN, that they had Heathrow Airport next to them, had been fighting since 1993. So there was a very big difference. And we have now new people coming into our group, because suddenly they realize they're going to be impacted by airspace modernization. But hey, I think it's only fair that if you've got the disbenefit, the benefit should be shared as well.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with that. You made a good point, Amel, which I didn't touch on, about ground noise from airports. And particularly during the night when aircraft have been serviced and so on. And I think there are examples of some airports restricting the hours in which the servicing can take place, so there is quietness for the local residents. Because you're absolutely right, for people living very close to the airport, that can be a really big problem. Right, Robert, but Bob.
Hi there. Yeah, I've just been listening to this. I live near Heathrow, and as Armel said, before 2024, when they trialled PBN flights, Heathrow was a benign neighbour. And when they did the trial flights, they put 2 flight paths out to the west and 2 flight paths to the east. And the reaction was absolutely astonishing. The people were so up in arms about it that I think any kind of concentration, which is what they were doing, essentially putting what was originally a 3-kilometre swathe of aircraft, which is they had the freedom to do so, put them down the white line of a road, you are naturally going to upset those people that live under that flight path. And we had, it's only a little village where I live in Inglewood Green. We filled our community hall up. We had the MPs. We had MP. We had Heathrow there, but everywhere around the airport that experienced this, Ascot, other areas, and Teddington and so forth, the response was similar. And at Ascot, they filled the Ascot racecourse up with people. You couldn't get another person in there. There was 1,200 people there, and I thought people were going to get lynched from Heathrow and the CAA, but thankfully they didn't. But there's a lot of anger. So to suggest that PBN might help, it doesn't. It just concentrates flights. It reduces the contours over the same people, many more flights. It's just we're being led up the garden path. Now, I've been just to continue the point. I've been involved at the airspace change process at Heathrow, and that's a 7-stage process for the. Is that everyone still there? Yeah, it's a 7-stage process. We've been involved with it, and Dave might want to come in on this, but we had a separate meeting with the airspace design team, and we asked about alternative routes and alternative tracks. They said, well, actually, because Heathrow's such a confined area, we can't really give you alternative routes. So your PBN routes are going to be your PBN routes. Okay, that might be fine if you get alternation, but just I go back to the 2014 trials when, as far as I was aware, Heathrow had been our neighbour. And after that point, I've been involved in this fight for fairness, and I'm not sure that we're going to get it. So that's all. I just wanted to make those points.
Okay, Bob, thanks very much for those and heartfelt points. Right. I think there's no more hands up, and our hour is almost up. So I just want, before handing back to Ella Vathira, I just want to remind you once again that we take a little bit of a break in August, but our next webinar is on the 17th of September. It is about Nicole Porter and Paul Hooper will present it. Nicole and Paul have both presented webinars in the past. And as I say, they have done a study asking communities what they would like to see if and when PBN routes come in. I was part of the advisory committee on that, and it's a very, very interesting study, so very worthwhile. But I thank you all for your contributions today. It's made my life a lot easier. Darlene, I'll see if we can get that study to you beforehand, because that's a good point. I'll speak to the authors. Right, Armel, I think it's over to you. Listen, we've got one before we go over to you, Armel. We've got one hand raised. So, Surindapal, your hand is up. It's over to you.
Many thanks, John. Apologies for a late joining. I got mixed up with the times, but
it's a story. It's a story of my life. So don't worry about it.
Yeah. Plus, I was swamped with the kind of recruitment process I had to finish off, unfortunately. But John, the fundamental point I have is that on one hand, government is pushing, including, of course, GLA, is pushing local authorities to increase the amount of housing.
Yeah.
On one hand. On the other hand, we are facing increasingly difficult challenge on how to make this new development, although I must say that the challenge around making existing developments harder comply with BS standards on noise. We all know that we need to achieve 30 decibels in the bedroom, limiting number of max noise events of 45 decibels, no more than 10 to 15. Although some people would still awaken below that limit. The question is, how do we meet that challenge head on? On one hand, accepting whatever the government proposes, whatever is they're saying is feasible, to continue to develop aviation in this country. On the other hand, trying to meet compliance with the relevant BS standards, namely BSA 233. How do we meet that challenge? And I have on many occasions suggested to both DFT and also as well as Heathrow and the current chair of Heathrow Community Noise Forum, that there needs to be a clear strategy, both on part of the government and in fact the businesses, how to adopt this. And I have made a suggestion that clear route is to really embrace the legal agreement that UK government has signed at international level, that polluter pays principle. And I would really love to hear your views and thoughts on how we might go about doing things indeed what we have signed up to.
No, you're absolutely right, Sir Rundabel. I think the government in the UK, and it may well be the same at other European airports and possibly American airports as well, is asking local authorities to do two contradictory things. One is to build many more homes, and certainly in the UK, and I know in other countries as well, more homes are needed. But at the same time, in the part of the world that you're representing, Sir Rundabel, we've got flight paths overhead, we've got aircraft noise overhead, and I think you've been put in an impossible position to, yes, we want more houses, but you mustn't build them under the flight path. Well, where do you build them? And I think you're absolutely right. The noise situation has really not been thought through, because I think government is trying to face two ways at the same time, and the polluter pays principle may well be the way forward.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all very much. This time I will hand back to Ella Mathera just for a few final words. Ella Mathera, just a few final words from yourself.
Yes, John. Thank you for this interesting discussion. And before saying good night, I want to say to all of you that if you don't belong to an association that is a member of UECNA, please try to persuade your association to become a member at our organization, because you are the voice and you are the strength of UECNA. The communities are. So please become a member and try to help us help you. Thank you all very much, and see you on 17th of September.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Look.
Happy birthday